What's up, everyone? My name is ZayNews, and this is the ZayNews Podcast, where we talk about all things basketball, whether it's the NBA, college hoops, youth sports, you name it. If it's about hoops, then we talk about it here. If you like the content, always make sure to like, subscribe, tell a friend, leave a comment. Tell me know that I'm tripping. If my take is trash, let me hear it in those comments. I want to create a community here. I want to create a place where we all can just discuss hoops, the sport we love, continue to grow this platform, and go from there. So without further ado, I want to get into it today. I want to talk about some stuff that's been on my mind, stuff that's been brewing because it's been about 2 weeks since I shot a podcast. And I really wanted to, because I haven't done it too much yet, transition into talking more about the WNBA, shed light onto what's going on over there, my opinion, because they're in the thick of it right now, right? They're in the middle of their season. They got about a month and a half left before the playoffs. So I just wanted to dive deeper into there because there's been some exciting stuff going on in the WNBA, some big talking points, and they deserve for us to be talking about them just as much as the men do. So let's get into it. So for starters, just want to kind of give you guys an overall general overview of what I've been noticing and talking points and things that I've been hearing. So obviously, first and foremost, I think the thing coming out of All-Star break last week that was most prominent was the "Pay Us What You Owe" shirts that the women had. Um, as always, anytime women start asking for more money, anytime women start asking for more pay, people get a little weird, right? They don't like women um, valuing themselves the way they should be valued. Let's put it like that. So you get a lot of negative comments. You get a lot of people saying, "Well, how are you going to ask for more money when your team hasn't turned a profit?" And it all just circles back to one word, and that's ignorance, right? You can have these bad opinions because you're ignorant to what's really going on in the league. And I actually did make a video talking about this a few weeks ago, right after All Star break, and pretty much to summarize it, it's that these women are going through contract negotiations right now, right? Their current CBA is about to be up. Their current collective bargaining agreement is about to be up, and in that they're negotiating for a new one for X amount of years moving forward. Now, what's also on the same timeline as that, and I think what people are getting confused is that they're also up for a new TV deal that's already been signed like a year ago, but that new TV deal will come into effect next season. And essentially, what will happen when that TV deal is signed is that those women, the WNBA in whole, will go from net money lost when you're talking about the league, each individual team, to making substantial amounts of money and being highly profitable, right? Because on their current TV deal, don't quote me on this, I'd have to go back and look, but they're currently making like $50 million a year as a collective league, and their new TV deal, they're going to be making over $200 million a year. So, whereas you talk about working under at a $50 million loss per year, that's the number that most people throw out there without really knowing what that means. Going into next year, they will immediately be making $100 million in excess a year. So, when you start to get the facts together, you understand these women are, well, first of all, this season's already written, right? They already knew what they were going to be making this season because they're still under their old TBA. They are negotiating for what's to come because they know that they are the product. They deserve a fair share, and they're currently making like 9% of the league's overall revenue, or something to that effect, right? No other professional league, the NBA, back when the NBA wasn't getting the ratings it deserved, and it was on the brink of shutting down, and Magic and Larry had to come save it. They weren't getting paid that low of a percent, right? If you are the product, you are the reason why people come to watch, and you're only getting 9% of the overall revenue. That's terrible. You know what I'm saying? There's no excuse for that. So the fact that they're fighting for their rights, they're fighting for a better seat at the table, a bigger seat at the table. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And when you put it in a perspective of they will very shortly be becoming profitable, then right, like what's the argument? Not to mention that you know if you're going to have these arguments about profitability, you have to understand business as a whole. And even though the WNBA players are the product, they are not the sole reason why that entity is profitable or not profitable, right? That largely has to do with the spending habits of the investors, of the owners, of the league office, of all these things, right? And what these, you know, front offices are doing, what these executives are doing is, they're playing the long game, right? So they're investing a lot of money up front into marketing, into building a brand, into building these teams, into building these individual players. So 10, 15, 20 years in the future, they have a sustainable business that's bringing in, just bringing in the bucks. You know what I'm saying? So over the past 5, 10 years, they have been very growth centric. And most businesses have these phases, right? Most startups, most new businesses, and they are very well still a pretty new business in the sports grand scheme of things, right? Because it takes a while to catch when you're, in the sports entertainment business. So with that being said, right, these women could play the best basketball, be the most profitable players ever. But if the league is centered on growth, if executives are centered on growth and they're investing more money into growth than what they're earning, then you're going to lose money regardless. I think that's the point that I'm trying to make here. So you have to just put things into perspective when you're talking about this stuff, and you have to know the facts, because all these brain dead takes that are just like, these women are losing a ton of money, no one wants to watch them. It's just not true, right? It's just really not true. No fact speaks to that. The WNBA has saw consistent growth for like the past 10 to 15 years, steadily year after year, more viewership, more viewership, more viewership. They have created a fan base that is unique to them and that is steadily growing, right? And that's not to say that Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, and those girls, that have recently came into the NBA haven't sped the process up, because they indeed have, right? Caitlin Clark undoubtedly has brought in eyeballs to the WNBA that were not there before at a large, large scale. You know what I'm saying? So, but even when you mention that, right, like, does she deserve to be on a rookie contract, making $70,000 a year? That sounds crazy to me. For someone who's brought in that much financial gain and brought in a fan base that quite literally is going to now, be with the WNBA forever, right? Like, the parents, the young people who are watching the WNBA now are probably going to watch the WNBA with their kids. Their kids are going to become fans, and so on and so forth. That's how the cycle continues, right? She quite literally is bringing millions and millions of dollars of value, hundreds of millions of dollars of value to this league, and she's only making $70 million on the new CBA or on the old CBA. So is that fair? You know what I'm saying? So just put things into perspective if you're going to have these arguments, because it's very easy to say, these women are just asking for too much and they haven't made a profit yet. You know what I'm saying? Just these narratives that are just untrue. So if you're going to have an opinion, make sure it's an informed one, because I've seen a lot of bad, uninformed, and just lazy takes about it, and it's unfortunate. But anyways, now getting in more to the basketball side of things, because I did want to focus more on the basketball itself and not the business of basketball. And it's so funny, right? It's so funny. First and foremost, Caitlin Clark, want to start here, in the basketball side of things. She came out, she was having an excellent year to start the season, right? Um, Getting double doubles, triple doubles, being the playmaker that she's really grown to be since coming into the WNBA, being that primary ball handler, shot creator, shot maker. She was You could see the progress. You could see the progression, right? As a player who came out, had a really good rookie year, right? You could see that she had made progress and she had made strides in her offseason. And then she gets hurt, right? She gets hurt, and she's been hurt essentially since early June, I want to say. And she's, had a hard time staying on the floor. And when she is on the floor, it just hasn't felt the same. Now, the reason I bring this up is because it's funny how quickly people turn on you, or how little fuel the detractors need to get themselves going. You know what I'm saying? It really is, because as soon as she got hurt, play obviously was affected, right? So her efficiency has been down, her turnovers have been way up, and she just hasn't looked like the player that we've known her to be, right? And I think there's a legitimacy to saying that she hasn't been a top 5, top 10 player this season, and there's nothing wrong with that. But very rarely do I see it put in the proper context, because to start the season, she very well looked like she was on her way to being a top 5 player this season in the WNBA. I don't think that's a stretch to say, but she gets injured, her play suffers for it, and you could see her struggling. That it is what it is, right? Like, so her efficiency is way down. Her like I said, turnovers are up. Her playmaking isn't as good, and it's tough to play on injuries like the ones that she's having, right? Soft tissue injuries, quad tears, and now she's having like groin issues on each of her groins. And it's funny because this is a perfect example of how one imbalance breeds another, right? Meaning, like, once you get hurt in one area, you're more susceptible to injuries in another, right? And it's just a trickle down effect because your body has to overcompensate. Once your body starts having to overcompensate, leads to more injuries, right? Especially when you're playing at such a high level, at such a high pace, and pushing your body the way that these women do. You know what I'm saying? So that got me off on a little tangent, but my point being at the start of this topic was just like, it's crazy, isn't it? Because now you got all the detractors, all the people who are saying, Caitlin Clark's overrated, she's not that good. They have fuel to their fire now because she's not playing up to her normal capabilities. But the reality is she's been hurt. You know what I'm saying? She's been hurt. It's affected her play. I don't think this is a time where we should be, going all in or, on the Caitlin Clark hate train and trying to say, she was never that good. It's just not the reality. It's not true. She's going to be a very good player in the WNBA for quite a long time, and you just got to get used to it. But injuries happen, right? Injuries happen, and they're not always. They're usually out of our control in large part because no one would choose to be injured. But it is what it is. I think it's probably going to be hard for her to get fully healthy for the rest of this season, but but going to the off season, maybe get healthier, focus on just building your body up, getting stronger, getting more physical. That's something that I've noticed she continues to need to probably improve on. Not to say that she hasn't, but just her physicality she can improve on, and I think that'll go a long way for her this upcoming off season. But we shall see. Into the Indiana Fever more specifically, though, because the Indiana Fever have made some great strides, right? You come in, you get the first pick because you're the worst team in the NBA. Last season was a growing year, but they wound up, catching some lightning in the bottle, having some success, winning some games, making it to the playoffs, I believe, actually. And then the offseason, they did some work. They did some work. They got a really good team around Kalen, and not even around Kalen, but they got some people who legitimately can go. You know what I'm saying? Who can really go. And with that being said, they've been playing exceptionally well. Let's not say exceptionally well, but they were playing at a very high level. Now, recently they've struggled, right? Kalen's been on and off the court. So you got one of your best players off the court, but they've held it down. They're still in the playoff hunt, and I expect if Clark can get to like 80-90%, that there'll be a tough outcome playoff time. I think that's you know a fair assessment to make. Not saying that they're going to somehow have some Cinderella run or anything like that, because I don't believe that. But I think they'll be a tough out. I think they'll be a tough out in the playoffs, and then if they can maintain their health next season, year three Clark, with the team that they got, the Cunninghams, the good role players, the good um, shot makers, all that sort of stuff. They can do some damage. They can do some damage for sure. Um, moving on though, moving on. Angel Reese. Now Angel Reese is one we gotta, she's one who's had a lot of negativity surrounding her, but that girl's been playing her butt off. Now she got injured recently as well. I think she played a couple games while injured, but eventually she decided to sit out, and you could see that kind of affected in the stat lines and the way that she was playing. But that girl's been hooping, and the change has been, if you haven't been watching, that they've just allowed her to be more of the primary ball handler, right? The Chicago Sky team doesn't have a ton of ball handlers, so she's been kind of playing that point forward role and doing a good job at it. Now, she has some areas to work on in her skill set. It doesn't seem like it's supernatural to her just yet, right? There's some areas where you can tell that she gets uncomfortable when she's really getting pressured by a good athletic wing, when she has to make decisions too fast, right? When she gets sped up, sometimes she can get sped up still. But overall, it's been a net positive. It's been a net positive for her and her career, because I don't think she's just a traditional low post player. I think she's more of that hybrid. You know what I'm saying? She's more of that hybrid, and she's showing a wide ranging skill set that she wasn't able to show in her rookie year. But she's been hooping. There was a stretch where she, over like 6 to 8 games, where she was averaging like 18, 10, and 5 or something like that. She was hooping on high percentage, over 50% from the field, over 75% from the free throw line, right? Not a great 3-point shooter, not a great long ball shooter, but hooping for real, like really hooping. And you just got to give a round of applause to growth like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, cuz she's kind of thrown in the fire, playing a position that she hadn't yet played in the WNBA, but excelling in that position and really just bringing to light some of her best qualities as a basketball player. And I think she's someone who will continue to grow. She's a great athlete. She's long. She has a good frame on her. Obviously, there's still the thing with her, like there's some clear areas where she can grow and develop. So if she does that, then the sky's the limit. You know what I'm saying? And she can really take off and just become a fantastic player. I mean, not saying that she's not already a fantastic player in the WNBA, but she could really become like, you know, MVP caliber player in this league. So we'll see. But she's been hooping, man. She's been hooping. Obviously injured right now, but hopefully she can come back healthy, finish out the season strong, and really just put a stamp on, I think, a successful season of growth for her. Right? Hasn't been winning a ton. Their team still has a lot of work to do, but in terms of her growth, right? Like she's progressing in a very, very good way. So again, got to give them a pat on the back when that pat on the back is due. Um, Last but not least, we can just round out the league really quick. But the the Minnesota Lynx still hooping, New York Liberty still hooping. I think the teams that we foresaw hooping are hooping. Nafisa Collier are probably going to be MVP, best team in the league, statistically one of the best players in the league. Even though I think a lot of people still think Asia is the best player, my goodness, they got some talent across that league. They got some talent across that league. Them ladies be hooping, man. So if you haven't watched, go watch some WNBA because it's very high level basketball from a perspective of just playing the right way, executing, playing defense at a high level, offense at a high level, making shots at a high level. It has a lot of stuff to, you know, enjoy and watch. So make sure if you haven't tuned in, you go tuned in because it's a lot of fun. But moving on. There's something I wanted to talk about today that wasn't actually on my agenda or my outline, and I want to make sure I get to it. Give me 1 second. Here we go. Here we go. I'm back. Sorry. So there's always this interesting narrative, and I'm shifting focus to the NBA now. There's this interesting there's a how do I want to put this? There's a very common narrative out there, right? That players today are more skilled than players of yesteryear are. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's fair, right? That's something that I would agree with in general. Um, Players today, on average, overall, have a wider ranging skill set than players of the past. That's for sure. But with that being said, and something that I've noticed around the league, and this is just a personal preference thing, but like there's not as many bucket getters in the league anymore. Now tell me if I'm crazy, but it feels to me like there's not just as many pure scorers in the NBA as there were in the 2000s, as there were in the 90s. Um, and I think a lot of that has to do with players just focusing more on utility than specializing, right? In the past, obviously, there used to be a lot more specialists. You could be just a fantastic scorer. You could be just a fantastic defender. You could be just a fantastic shooter. You could be just a fantastic ball handler. You know what I'm saying? As like a backup point guard, if you were a fantastic ball handler who could get teams into their sets, sometimes that was enough. Excuse me. But there's just not as much of that anymore. There's not as much specialist, and we all know that, right? We all see that in the league. There's more utility in players. But with that being said, there used to be some certified buckets in the NBA, and there's not as many of those anymore. And certified buckets, guys who could just score, you could put them in positions. They were electric. They could put points up in a hurry. So let me go down a list of some guys from the early 2000s who were just buckets. You know what I'm saying? Just buckets. Just could score the rock in a multitude of different ways. They could shoot that thing. They could post. They could do it all, right? And one of the first ones who comes to mind is Al Harrington. Has there been a player in the last 5 years who is similar to Al Harrington? Because I remember vividly like watching Al Harrington play. Like he'd have games 7 threes, you know what I'm saying? Then he'd have games, okay, let me get to the rack. Let me get to the mid post, operate from here. Just like a crafty scorer. How many guys are like that in the NBA today? Because I just don't, you know what I'm saying? You don't see players like that. Wasn't super athletic, 6'7", 6'8", but could score in a multitude of different ways, could be serviceable in a multitude of different ways. And, ultimately, you put him on any team and and you give him the opportunity, you give him the shots, he's gonna make those shots. You know what I'm saying? Like he was a bucket. He was a bucket. He was a guy who was just on the court to be a bucket. You can go even further than that though. You could go guys like Nate Robinson, obviously at 5'8". You come off the bench, he's an electric scorer, quick, crafty. Even a guy like Jameer Nelson, you know what I'm saying? He did some other things good as well. He's a good point guard, good playmaker. But like if you let him go, like he could score really well. And I'm sure there's more Antoine Jameson. I mean, Antoine Jameson, I think, was an all-star a few times, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like there was just guys who were just put on this earth to score, and there was a lot of them back then, and it just doesn't seem like there's as many of those guys, and that's not a bad thing per se, what I'm saying, and obviously you still have the best players in the league that indeed are buckets, but like in terms of just like role players or that step down from all stars and stuff like that, there's just not as many of those guys. And I think you all would agree with me. But either way, it's not that one is better than the other or one is bad, but it's just different. You know what I'm saying? It's just different. And I remember hopping on 2K with Al Harrington, and he'll give you 40 on 2K just because if he gets that three ball going, he gets hot. It's just like, oh, there ain't nothing you could do about it. You know what I'm saying? He was a weapon. He was a weapon on 2K. Jamal Crawford, another one. Obviously, he played, into like 2020, 2021, but he was another guy from the early 2000s into the 2010s who was just a bucket. So just an interesting topic that I wanted to touch on that I thought popped in my head the other day, and I was like, man, there really aren't outside of the best players in the NBA, right? Outside of the absolute best guys who can score, who can do everything, there aren't as many role players or utility guys who can just score. I'm thinking right now you got a guy like Jordan Clarkson, he's one. Um, the kid from Boston, the sixth man of the year from Boston, whose name just escapes me. Um, yeah, it's just it gets a little dim after that. I'm sure there's a few that I'm missing. Don't get me wrong, but it's a little dim after that. You know what I'm saying? Like there's not as many of them. It felt like almost every team had that guy, right? Like um, the uh, the Denver Nuggets had J.R. Smith. Washington had Nick Young. Um, I already mentioned Al Harrington. You know what I'm saying? I know there's more. I know there's more that I'm not thinking of right now. But like every team, I'm saying every team had one of those guys. There was just a bucket getter. Um, even who the Hornets have? They had Thorin. Is it Marcus Thornton? Marcus Thornton, I think. He came into the league. I was like 20 as a rookie. I think that was when Chris Paul was still on the roster right before he left for the Clippers. Um, like guys like that, you know what I'm saying? Just pure buckets. That's what I'm saying. Just pure buckets. There was a lot of those guys back then, and there just doesn't seem to be as many of them anymore. But just was a fun conversation that I wanted to have. But anyways, we can finish this up just talking about the league, man, talking about the NBA and where it's at. Um, there's been some interesting stuff to come out. Um, I think it's going to be an exciting season, man. Why does it feel like the West just continues to get better? You know what I'm saying? Every year it just feels like the West is getting better and better. And obviously you got to wait to see how things play out. You don't know until you play because teams can't, could end up not meshing well. Chemistry could be an issue, but the West just continues to get better and it's like holy cow, these guys are loaded. I made a comment about Minnesota last week about how I don't feel like if there's one team in the West who I feel like is stagnated and not got any better, who has been at the top of the West, it's Minnesota, right? Now, obviously, they made the moves that they needed to make. They re-signed Naz Reid, they re-signed Julius Randle. You let NWA, Nikhil Alexander Walker, walk. Um, and I think just to get them, honestly, I think that move was done to make sure that they stay under the second apron because last year they were in the second apron. So I think the idea there is hopefully, at least I would hope that they start to allow Rob Dillingham some freedom to make some mistakes, bring him into the starting lineup, and let him work his way into being your future guard alongside and Jaden McDaniels and those guys. But they're the only team who I think didn't get better out of teams who I think can compete for a championship next season. And I think if I'm being honest, people aren't going to like this. Minnesota fans in particular aren't going to like this. If there's one team that I think will regress next season, and to be fair, right, the regression is, Western Conference Finals. You know what I'm saying? But I personally, if I had to pick today, I would not pick them to be in the Western Conference Finals, right? I think there's 4 or 5 teams that are better than them in the West right now as it stands. Now they have a full season under their belt, with Julius Randle on the roster. Maybe that changes some things. But to me, the driver for them is just going to be Anthony Edwards' progression. I think if they want to ultimately become a championship team with this current roster makeup, he has to just make a step that he hasn't made yet. And he very well could. Let's be clear. If we all think Anthony Edwards is going to be you know, for one, he's already an exceptional talent. Let's not get it twisted. Like if we think he's going to be top 3 player in the NBA, like I think he'll need to be that for that team to maximize their potential. If I'm being honest, and for them to be like a championship team, make it to the finals, compete with or beat whoever's on the other side of them. I think that's what he needs to become. At least a top 5 player, because I don't think he's a top 5 player yet, to be honest with you. Um, but if he can become that, then the sky's the limit for them. But as it stands today. But without him making that point being, without him making that leap, without Anthony Edwards making that leap. Oh, jeez. Excuse me. Anyways, without Anthony Edwards making that leap and becoming, a top 5 player in the NBA, I just don't foresee that roster making it to a finals and winning a finals. And I think based on the moves they made, based on what we saw last year in the playoffs, I would predict for them in the 2025-2026 season, I would predict for them to regress a little bit. I would predict for them to be a first or second round exit next season, if I'm being honest. That's just my thoughts. Only got a few more minutes left here, but I want to finish up. Um, the East will be interesting, and I hope the Milwaukee Bucks still make some moves because I still do believe that the East is open and there's some opportunity there to really make a push. And I don't think anytime you have the best player in the world or a top 2 or 3 player in the world, you don't need much to make a push. Now they made some great moves. They got Miles Turner. Um, they re-signed some guys from last season. I think they should have went harder after Bradley Beal, but I don't necessarily think Bradley Beal wanted to play in Milwaukee. I am a fan of signing Russell Westbrook. Now, Russell Westbrook is going to be like 36 next season, year 17, but and who knows if he wants to be closer to home or not. Maybe he does with his family. I would totally get that for him and where he's at in his career. But I think Russell Westbrook, a guy who's extremely durable throughout the course of his career, still in year 17, 35, 36 years old, extremely electric, right? Like as one of the most athletic point guards to ever play the game, he's still a upper level athlete in the NBA. Let's be fair about that. Let's be real about that. And with that being said, a guy who can play a lot of games, who can still be electric, who can still be dynamic on the offensive end of the floor when he's given the keys, I think he would be great for a team like that who needs to fill some holes. I think, you'd be concerned about the shooting with him and Giannis. I think you let Russ play like 25 minutes a game, control that second unit, and allow him to be Russ a little bit more. I think he's still a player who can give you like 14, 8, and 8. And that could be very valuable for a team like Milwaukee in the East. You know what I'm saying? 14, 8, and 8, electric, getting downhill, making plays. Right. And the thing is for Milwaukee, like, would you rather, uh, you know, Kevin Porter Jr. with the ball in his hands, a guy who can equally be turnover prone, can make a lot of mistakes, all that sort of stuff. He is good with the ball in his hands. He can make some plays. He is dynamic in that way, but he's just not the same. Even Russ at 36 years old, he's not as dynamic as Russ and what Russ was and Russ could be at this present moment. So I think Russ could be a very very good piece for them to add to their team. And I think if I was their management and trying to just make the most out of this season, that's a player that I would really explore trying to add to that Milwaukee unit. But that's just my thoughts. That's just my thoughts, guys.